The highest time of risk for suicide attempts is the week to 2 weeks post-discharge from a psychiatric hospital.
And data shows that, like, when people are involuntarily committed, they're much less likely to seek, like, psychiatric treatment and other things outside of the hospital.
How to be patient.
And welcome back to How to Be Patient, the podcast where we test your patience and ours as Margaret and I try to intelligently navigate through hard conversations.
That was a good
by making it
opening.
easy. Thank you.
Okay, season 2, let's go.
Yeah, we roll with this stuff now.
I don't know if you know I have a podcast. Do you tell people in real life that you have a podcast?
No, I usually just say pod. I gotta go record an ep for my pod.
And you,
like
but like if someone doesn't know it, like you're on a first date, are you like, I have a podcast? Like that's the lead in.
I try not to bring it up.
You're like, I'm famous.
I mean, like, so
they already know you're famous.
It comes up more often than I would like. I think like I try to like go on dates with people outside of medicine, and I like assume they won't know, and then they'll just be like, I've seen you on the For You page. I know who you are. I'm like, okay, so like, what kind of
like I
advertisement
saw
do you
your
want?
lifting video.
Like, yeah, why are we open this so fast? So, yeah. Anyways, quick segue away from Preston's personal life into the topic of this episode.
You spent the entirety of season 1 trying to dig into my personal life. Now you don't like the Uno reverse.
Just that was a quick sidestep. So, today we're talking about why people die by suicide, which is something that I think a lot of people see commentary on in the public space, and it's something psychiatrists deal with all the time. But the mechanism of it, I think, is often not talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing to me about like mechanisms in general is that psychiatrists, in a way, are kind of allergic to mechanisms, and that's the way we organize things. But before we get into that, we're going to do today's icebreaker, which is tell me about a time that you felt like a burden.
Do you want a real answer? Okay. I'm like, there's so many jokes I could make here. Sometime when I felt like a burden. I think one I'm comfortable sharing is when my dad has a neurologic illness, and he was diagnosed with glioblastoma when I was like a junior in college, February 17th to be particular. You remember those dates. And when you're first going through grief or change like that, like which, for the non-healthcare people or just not been to med school recently, glioblastoma is a really aggressive cancer, brain cancer that usually has like, I think a 6-month like diagnostic, like whatever. So my dad is still alive nearly 9 years later, but when someone first gets sick, you're kind of like people kind of rush to be with you. But I think grief that is more complicated than that and isn't like clearly punctuated by this happened and they passed away, or this happened and how we think about how we can do things like as a family or what the future might look like changed. Like it's a moving amorphous thing that lasts a long time. And I think still having grief in different ways and having to explain it was like a time where I guess I sort of felt like a burden. I sort of felt like this is just so heavy and dark, and like I don't want to
So I'm confused how you felt like a burden. Is it because you were leaning on your friends or people?
Yeah, and I think just like, I don't know, it was like junior into senior year of college, and it's like other people, like we're reaching milestones, and it's like it's kind of like senior year of college is supposed to be like a happy time, and then I'm like worried if my dad is going to be alive.
I see.
By the time I graduate, like
who
everything.
were you burdening? Who did you feel like you were burdening?
I think no one said anything that made me think I was burdening them. It was more my like own internal kind of feeling of like this is heavy and dark and repetitive, and I don't want to like ruin my friends. Like good time, or I don't want to bring them. It was more than just like the content. It was like I don't want them to bring this like, I don't want to bring them this like unsolved emotional energy that is just like dark and doesn't know if things will be good in life. Like right, like you feel like your life's falling apart when you go through that kind of.
So your friends are excited and they're graduating, finding internships, and you didn't want to like basically bring all this tragedy to them. You didn't want to impose.
Yeah. And I worked in ministry too. I was like a theology major, and I was so like, I was just like, where, not to be dark. I'm burning the podcast right now. But like at that time, especially, I was like, where's God in this? Like, so that is sometimes the time that I feel like it's felt really heavy in me, and I don't want that heaviness to almost infect other people.
That's interesting. So you felt like this deep emotional burden to other people.
Yeah.
So
What about you?
mine is quite different.
Mhm.
And it's when I was 5 years old, and I was on one of those like bike extensions,
Mhm.
you know, that like your parents have. There's like an extra wheel with
Oh,
a seat on
I
it
do know this.
that you can stick on the back of a
I
bike.
do know this.
And my mom and I would go riding all the time with that. And I just remember all the time we're going up a hill, and mom's like, I don't feel any pedaling back there, Preston. We have to pedal on the hills together. And then like I have another memory of me just like on the side of the road getting scolded while my mom's like trying to chug water. and then she'd be like,
those quads are weak as
she'd be like, it's be a hell of a lot easier without 50 pounds of dead weight, Preston. And I'm like, I would like pedal for a little bit, and then I'd get distracted by like leaves or something, and we'd like slow down, and so I was definitely a burden then. A physical burden. Like she was literally carrying the weight of me up a hill.
I'm laughing because my dad and I didn't learn to ride a bike till I was like 8, embarrassing. And we used to go on this like family long bike ride up in Wisconsin, and my dad used to have to do that. Like he would take me, I would be on the back of it, and he would similarly be like, "What are you doing?" And after he got sick, when we went to Door County, which is this place in Wisconsin again, he was like, couldn't ride a bike, and he was like, "Maggie, guess who's riding on the back of the bike now?" So just delightfully connected in odd ways.
So funnily enough, I also wrote on that thing with my dad, and one time he was trying to make a turn around a stoplight, and the whole contraption collapsed, and he broke his arm. So I remember that, and then the fire truck came, and they had like stopped the entire intersection. My dad's just like sitting there with his arm broken. Like I remember talking to a fireman, and I'm just sitting on the sidewalk, and I was like, "Dad, can we go home? Come on, Dad! Like stop complaining about your arm." So actually, my dad was a burden to me at that point. And then a lady came up and said to the fireman, "Hey, can you change the light back to green?" And that's how I learned that the fireman can control stoplights.
Wow. In a way, you learned about God that day too. Both a lot of same
so
themes.
Weirdly enough, when I'm in traffic and like I see sirens and they pull over and they change the light to green, I think about my dad and how he broke his arm in that intersection. All right, this has been a great icebreaker, and moving on to the mechanism of suicide.
and Preston and I were both annoying as kids and couldn't ride bikes. Is what you should get from this listener.
Exactly. So, the burdensome part will become more relevant later as we kind of dive into some of these theories. But now a word on causality in psychiatry. We for some reason refuse to use this like concept of like being secondary to something else. And so, I guess what for people that are like less inclined in medicine, when you say secondary in medicine, it means indirect cause of or indirect response to. So an example could be renal stenosis or hardening of the renal arteries secondary to high blood pressure. So hardening the renal arteries in direct response of high blood pressure. So we've established that we have a primary disease and it causes other secondary diseases. And those secondary diseases can cause third level things which are called tertiary, but we don't need to get into all of that. The point is, a lot of medical science feels comfortable with this linear causality, even though there are many other things that could cause one or another. But psychiatry doesn't do that. We're just like, it's all a soup and it happened together. And you kind of like see that in our notes. So like, for example, a patient will come in and they're suicidal and it's like right after their girlfriend broke up with them. Like their girlfriend's like, "I'm breaking up with you." And they're like, "I'm going to kill myself." But then when they come in and we like write up their whole assessment, like saying like they're suicidal secondary to a breakup in direct response to a breakup is like not the language that's kind of like tolerated or accepted. It's like they were suicidal in the context of relationship difficulties and also maybe medication non-adherence and also substance use and also, poor life or poor coping skills, life stressors, things like that. So we're like, well, they don't have a lot of good ways to cope, and also they weren't on their meds, and also, they don't have another like house to go live at if they broke up. So all that really was contributing, but we don't like know the direct cause. It's like,
But they don't like how long our notes are.
yeah, who's to say,
Yeah.
It's just we're all just people swimming in this stew that is the biopsychosocial model.
Well, like psychiatry is also like our nature is as a field has historically been, if we can't figure out why something's happening to the brain, it's not neurology, it's psychiatry. Like if there's not an organic cause,
Yeah.
historically it has been psychiatry's purview to be like, okay, we can't know. Like when we can know, it becomes neurology.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that the more we run with it, I think the less effective that will become for our field. And maybe, I think 100 years ago was really relevant when even things like syphilis weren't identified.
Yeah.
So who knows? It's probably psychiatry, but like people who had neurosyphilis back in 1905 they were in psych wards.
Right.
With psychosis, and they were kind of seen the same as people with schizophrenia because we just didn't know what a spirochete was. That there's these microbes in their blood that are causing this.
Why do you think you're saying like the modern psychiatry is allergic to having a cause? What do you think is like the cause of our allergy to causes?
I think it's because like the genesis of our profession is being a rule out specialty. We were built on all medical causes ruled out first, and and everything is categorized in, is it a medical cause or is it a psychiatric cause? And like for some reason we're like annexed over here on this island, like Napoleon or something, and we need to come back and claim our army.
We have to come back and conquer medicine.
No, seriously, like I did that today on a note. I have like our note template is like psych problems and then medical problems. And this patient has like delirium and cerebral ataxia and hallucinations. And I'm like, these are all like, this Venn diagram is all overlapped. So I can't neatly divide them in their like psych problems and their medical problems. So I just deleted all of it because I got annoyed with it.
I was going to say, I had a lecture yesterday that was like talking about defining normal in psychiatry, and it's like a historical, ethical, clinical perspective. And we were talking about like going from DSM-4 to DSM-5, and that we like had the axes model, and you could have these like, this is a little afield.
They like numbers on a slider, right?
They had like, it was like personality.
It was like 40% personality.
Well, but in some ways that's more accurate. Like it would capture more of what you're saying, right?
No,
but
I agree.
There's still that not clear. At the center of our work still remains the like, is there a cause? And then there's also the history of our job being like, we actually do know the cause and we'll fix it with malaria.
Yeah, exactly.
You sinned. That's why. Like historically.
We're still trying to get back against our correct for the complacency that we had early on.
Yeah.
That's tough. Lobotomies are tough. They're really hard to have. So, yeah, maybe we're in the right spot. We should still be humble. It just makes me wonder, like, are we just going to keep slowly finding mechanisms for stuff, and psychiatry is going to shrink until we inevitably like map every neuron in the brain and prove that free will doesn't exist, and then our field will just be completely absorbed into neurology?
Well, that's season 3 of the podcast.
Anyways, that was just a shower thought I had this morning.
You have been working a lot.
Yes. Sorry, guys. Anyways,
I'm super cool.
When we think about the mechanism for suicide, though, this is something that like kind of is debated in a lot of like psychosocial circles, and I think it can be helpful to at least start to understand these different paths that people take when they approach it, which is ultimately the point of kind of this whole argument about looking for mechanisms in psychiatry, because I often like kind of look at the neuroscience aspects of things and find mechanisms that I may have to, surmise or make some generous leaps with. But the same kind of applies here on social stuff. So, as pretend that we're getting on the magic school bus and
This is still going to be a
gonna
really
take you
dark
back to
episode with Miss
France
Frizzle.
yeah, sorry, Miss Frizzle, we're going to France
This is not this PBS 13. Like,
in 1897. And I'm not sorry because it's 1897. I'm sorry because it's France. But anyways, there's this guy, Emil Durkheim. Have you heard of him?
I have heard the name, but I do not.
Mm.
I couldn't tell you anything more than that. I would say I probably should know more about him.
Okay, so he was a sociologist who was really interested in studying why people take their own lives. And he wrote a book called Le Suicide. He had this really interesting theory as to what drives people to do this. And his theory was all built around society. He was like, he was like, society. It's all their connection to society. which is like, wild as it sounds, his theories have survived the last 125 years for a reason. And it's because it actually is all society in a way. So
Yeah, what did he think?
he came up with 4 different categories for kind of the different mechanisms of them. And I want to, they all kind of have different levels of like people's connection to society and also different levels of like their regulation within that. So the first one I want to start out with is like a very classic one that we see, and this is called anomic suicidality. So A meaning like without, like atypical, like it's not typical, and then nomic meaning like laws or norms. So without law, lawless, really. So this is the type of suicidality that like a couple different modern models are built off of, but it's when you have a lot of extreme emotional or psychosocial distress, maybe upheaval, maybe a big crisis, and you can't cope with it, and you immediately, in a way to kind of extinguish this feeling, turn to suicidality. Almost like you're panicked and you unplug the game. Is kind of how I think about it.
Yeah.
So a good example of some of these that we've probably seen are like during the '08 crash, when some stockbrokers lost.
When you and I were 12 and
yeah, I was
14
like,
and 12.
I'm like on Wii Fit listening to like my parents.
You're locked in.
I'm like doing that like
I'm a freshman in high school. I'm
snowboarding. My mom's crying.
Dad, why is your arm broken?
She's like, we're upside down on our mortgage.
You're like, the Wii Fit just called me fat.
Yeah. So anyways, we didn't lose millions of dollars overnight, but some people did. And we heard about them like immediately like jumping off of buildings and taking their own life.
Yeah.
Another example of this could be someone who abruptly deals with a really big transition or a loss of identity. So, or even like a large sentencing. So we've seen like footage of people who have been sentenced to life and then like take a cyanide pill in prison. Another good example of this could be that in White Lotus season 3.
I was going to say, oh wait.
Yeah, the dad who's like becoming suicidal at like confronting like this huge change and loss of money for his family.
Right. And you can see in the show like these like iterations of imagination that he can't think of a way in a lot of those moments of a life that is different and not subsumed by this current moment of the financial loss and arrest or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And he's like, he's so dysregulated. He's looking for a way out and he can't. And his has aspects of a different one, another one as well. But that's is a good example of it. So these are the patients that, weirdly enough, and we'll talk about this more in another episode on risk factors, but safety planning can be more effective for them. Just because a lot of this is kind of like a failure to cope with like severe immediate distress.
Yeah.
And this is kind of a way to escape that. It's kind of like it's failure of coping, really, because normally you can cope and make a feeling go away, but if you're like, I can't make any of these go away, this is going nuclear, really.
I wonder also, like with this kind of thing where there's this sort of sudden change and sudden like negative impact, it sort of intuitively makes sense, although I don't like using intuition to clinically reason, but that it's having another person safety plan and come up with coping skills and a support plan, like to kind of in the dysregulated mind to have a regulated kind of executive function person come in and plan with them versus when there's more of the element of like chronic hopelessness where there has been a lot of things that have been tried and not helped.
Yeah. Great segue. basically with dealing with this chronic hopelessness and trying different things and realize that the future can't happen, being a reason for why you might want to take your own life. And that's with the fatalistic concept of suicide. The opposite of anomic, which is too little regulation, is too much regulation. And then that's the concept of like just being a prisoner of your environment. So the way I kind of think about it is like you have this perceived hopelessness from your shackles, and there's no way for you to like escape this situation. And so then you say, okay, I'm not in a panic mode and I'm not thinking, I'm just pulling the trigger. It's I've thought about this a lot and there's no way forward. And that's why I'm going to end it.
How do you feel like, because I see how, I feel like I'm kind of confused on how that's different than the like crisis I see, like when we're thinking about like the White Lotus guy situation.
A hypothetical patient could be like someone who's like completely disabled and they are incontinent, they get repeat urinary tract infections, sometimes like so severe that they have to come to the hospital, and now they have extended spectrum bacterial resistance. So they have these like week-long hospital stays where they get these like terrible hospital sores. Then they go back out to a specialized nursing facility where they get PT, and then they get delirious, get another infection, go back in, and then they finally get home where they have like no quality of life or anything that they want to live for. And they just kind of like feel terminally trapped by their situation. That person will come to the conclusion that I want to end it all.
Yeah.
And by too much regulation, what I'm saying is like too many barriers, too many constraints, things like that. So this isn't coming from them out of this like crisis and immediate need to cope and try to extinguish this transient, albeit intense feeling that's coming on from like that upheaval, like the '08 crash. This is a thorough and well thought out conclusion that there is nothing to live for because of my constraints. That would be more like the fatalistic picture.
It feels like metaphorically, like the first one's kind of like if I you suddenly had appendicitis and there was something suddenly wrong versus you suffering with like Crohn's disease, like the emotional kind of insult acuity is sort of like there's like this longer lasting ongoing thing and like no way out versus like sudden really negative thing. Possibly there's a way out.
I would say one is like getting shot and dealing with that immediate pain, and the other one is like being trapped in a well.
Can you elaborate on this metaphor?
Yeah, so like when you're trapped in a well, you can look up and you can see sunlight, but you know you'll never be able to reach it.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
And all you can do is sit around all day and contemplate how trapped you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe like you've tried to find ways to cope and to live in the well, but ultimately decided that you're not happy with that, and that the things that you want to live for aren't worth living for.
Yeah.
So this can become like really relevant in how we conceptualize it for some patients who maybe because of their depression or other things that impair their cognition may perceive burdens or assess burdens to be different than they actually are. And so a lot of this is kind of tied to hopelessness, which is a really classic symptom of depression.
Yeah.
So in that case, like there are some people that very well like that, disabled patient, that they do have these really strong barriers in their life.
Yeah.
But then there's other people who maybe they have other options, but because of their psychiatric illness, they have trouble assessing them. Does it kind of like make sense? It's almost like they're not in the well, but their body's not in the well, but their mind is, I guess.
Yeah. I got you. That they're like this can both be this. It's like this match of like external environment, negative things, internal mental like health, perception, affective state, illness, and how those two combine if they're in the well or not.
So these are kind of like probably classic ones that you see, and I imagine you're probably able to already like think of examples that you've seen in clinical practice that kind of line up with both of these.
Yeah. The thing that's coming to my mind is like, I feel like a lot of times patients that are kind of challenging an outpatient are the people who maybe are kind of in the well, but then suddenly someone shoots them in the well. And
yeah,
sorry,
no, seriously, like no
metaphor. I'm sorry,
no.
we took the metaphor too far.
Yeah, maybe one is like, and then getting shot is like stubbing your toe.
Or no, like if it's like someone's chronically kind of like maybe they have passive suicidality, like suicidal thoughts, but no plan or intent. But then like something
A crisis
acute
is superimposed on
happens.
on top of it.
So
yeah.
it's like the both and, I
yeah,
guess.
these can stack, unfortunately. And like an example could be like if that character from The White Lotus had been depressed for a while.
Yeah.
And then now he's facing this.
Yeah.
Like everything is like kind of coming against him.
Right. Hey, Preston, what does this sound remind you of?
Oh, God. It makes me think about being on call. It's the pager.
Okay, well, it's not my pager, but it is equally stressful and is the timer I use for studying.
Oh, we got a Pomodoro queen over here.
Do you know what has made studying less stressful, though?
What?
Now you know psych. You familiar?
Am I familiar? I use Now You Know Psych for my in-training exams. Are we talking about the same thing? That excellent resource that has thousands of questions with associated flashcards, organized content in a user-friendly way?
You use it for Prite. I'm using it for the board exams. But yes, we are talking about the same resource.
We can use it for both? Ayo.
Ready to take your exam prep to the next level? Go to nowyouknowpsych.com and enter the code BEPATIENT at checkout for 20% off. That's nowyouknowpsych.com.
Hey, so I want to talk to you about this new podcast I think every clinician should be aware of. It's the Sepsis Spectrum from Sepsis Alliance, and it's done by this great critical care nurse, Nicole Kupchik.
You may be asking, why are two psychiatrists talking about sepsis? But if you've spent any time in the hospital where psychiatrists or mental health practitioners go, you know that whenever someone's mental status is altered, we can be called. And not knowing the signs of sepsis, whether that's in the ICU, the ED, or other places in the hospital, can mean that we're missing things alongside the team for things that'll really impact our patients.
Yeah, I mean, delirium comes on quick and fast, and you have to keep it on your differential. It's hit me on the inpatient psych floor. And even for nurses that work in mental health and don't think they're going to come across this stuff, it's going to come across you. So it's important just to keep it on your radar, and I think this is a great resource for it. So if you want, you can listen to the Sepsis Spectrum wherever you get your podcasts, or you can watch it on Sepsis Alliance's YouTube channel.
To learn how you can earn free nursing CE credits just by listening, visit sepsispodcast.org. That's SEPSIS podcast.org for more information.
So the next kind of archetype or like common theme that was brought up by Durkheim is actually probably something that neither of us have come across in clinical care, and that's altruistic suicide.
Like seppuku? Oh, wait, that's honor.
Seppuku?
Seppuku, yeah. You would know how to pronounce it correctly.
Kind of, I guess. Yeah, actually. So this one is from regulation, but almost like too much connection to society, where you've become so invested in society that your own life is more important, your own life has more value in what it serves to society than it does to you, I guess.
So being like a martyr for a cause would also be...
Exactly.
This?
So kamikaze pilots in World War II would be an example of altruistic suicide. People that are willing to die for a cause.
Yeah.
So and this is from radical, almost like hyper integration into society
versus hyper individualism.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So these other ones, that anomic and fatalistic, kind of have to deal with your emotional regulation in response to the constraints of society. Mm-hmm. This one is in direct reaction to your integration in society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's being like, you're so embedded in society that you're willing to submit your life to the cause or the purpose or whatever function that you hope society uses it for.
Yeah. It's almost like, I feel like when they talk about like bee colonies, how they're like, it's almost that level of integration where they're like sacrificial. I don't know enough about bees to make this metaphor stick, but like that there is this like change of how bees evolve and then how they kind of, I think isn't the military kind of in general?
Yeah.
A level of,
so
how much risk do you have to take for it to be counting as this?
I would distinguish between tolerating risk in service of your country, like being willing to be in combat or something, versus altruistic suicide is like knowingly taking your own life for the cause. So there's a difference between like being a part of a fire team and going into like a high intensity, dangerous environment where the intent isn't for you to die. It's for you to complete the mission. But if you do die, you're willing to lay your life down versus I'm going to kill myself to detonate this bomb for the sake of my organization that's trying to make some kind of political point or something like that, which is something we define as terrorism.
But there is kind of a spectrum of it where like these two examples like have that clear delineation, but like if you're 95% sure you're being sent on a mission and like there's a 95% chance you die, like, not that you would necessarily know that, but you know, there's like different odds for different things. I'm thinking about like different rescuers or like 9/11 rescuers, like
yeah, like don't go back into the burning building, John. It's suicide. And he's like, I have to save those kids. Like that type of
I say
situation.
it just to not other this as like something that doesn't belong in our current culture, just because like if it's like either or, then yeah, it's kind of easy to be like, that's not here. But I think it's somewhat an arbitrary line. Like, how sure do you have to be? Like, it's only if you're 100% sure you're going to die.
No, you're right. It is arbitrary. The line is a bit arbitrary, and it is a spectrum because on one end you could say I'm willing to risk 0% of my life for like the sake of my country. Like,
which is how I feel about this podcast.
yeah. You know, why would you risk your life for a man with an SM7B, pair of headphones, and a lot of opinions? So anyways, there's 0%, right? Like I won't even enlist. I'm not doing anything this. And then there's like I'm willing to enlist but I won't be in combat. Well, there's still the risk is higher, but it's not there. And then, you know, there's 99%, which is, you know, I'm indirectly putting my life at high risk by doing this. Or even in those situations, like I'm jumping on a grenade for my fellow teammates. You know, I think that would be kind of like the one that rides right in between there where you're on a combat mission and then a grenade pops out and you jump on it for the sake of other people. That would be like a high intense moment of like altruistic suicide.
Yeah. I mean, this would actually make this a feminist podcast, which is also to say pregnancy and childbirth would fall on this spectrum.
Sure. Yeah. Like risk your own life for the sake of others.
Anyway.
But maybe it'd be more like if society wanted you to have that kid, like some Handmaid's Tale type thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. It would move it more towards or away from that kind of like.
And so I guess what's interesting about this, and then the reason why we probably haven't come across it, is because this type of suicidal behavior is not really considered psychopathology, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this isn't something that you like find in the DSM. These aren't people that are like classically seen to have mental illness. They're just very bought in to whatever belief system they subscribe to.
Yeah.
Enough to do extreme acts. And I think it's kind of fascinating because when Durkheim was writing about this stuff, he wasn't really categorizing things in the DSM and like, this is sick and not sick. He was just like, why do people take their own lives? Question mark. And it's like, oh, sometimes they take their own lives because they think there's no point to life, but sometimes they take their own lives because they're so bought into a cause that they're willing to lay their life down for it.
Right.
And we've taken some of them and said like, this is pathology. And the other ones were just like, it's okay. Yeah. You know, you're welcome to.
Yeah. It gets at this core question that I think is at the center of a lot of medicine, but especially psychiatry, which is underneath our diagnoses and things that we talk about is an implicit value system and philosophy of what makes like the good life or a life worth living. What makes that? When is it a good reason to die? You know, kind of morally, or when is it pathology to die? Because you could imagine a world. I don't know, I'm not entirely a relativist, but like you could imagine a world where we had a different set of values that if we completely were like life is about pleasure and if someone's like been ill for this long, then like it makes 100% sense to do that. And by a pleasure principle, it would make no sense to die for the valor or for the like good of the community if the whole point of life is to just enjoy it the most that you can.
Exactly. My sidebar to like kind of
Sorry. Yeah.
the philosophy of the good of life. Yeah. So if the purpose of life is to achieve as much pleasure as possible, then by implication, the worst thing in life is the cessation of all pleasure. And what is death but the cessation of all pleasure? So by kind of living this hedonistic life, we're taught that the worst thing possible is death. But in societies where the greatest good in life maybe is to serve others,
Mhm.
then death is no longer the antithesis of the greatest good of life. It's actually in line with serving others. And
Yeah.
so in those other cultures that have like kind of a different idea of the greatest good, they fear death less.
Or like even in our culture, people who are religious, there
Yeah.
can be
Yeah, exactly. And
yeah.
I think I was kind of referring to the, I don't know, passive nihilistic Western culture where they're not like particularly religious, but haven't like thought forward a strong belief system or just kind of existing.
Mhm.
So that's fun and
Sorry
exciting.
for that
But
sidebar.
that was a good sidebar because it kind of goes into the next one, which is the opposite of altruistic. So if altruistic was too much societal integration, we have one left, which is too little societal integration. And this is actually the one that most models are built on today and that we've expanded upon a lot. So we're going to take a quick break. And then when we come back, we'll kind of go into the egoistic model of suicidality and how we start to conceptualize it today. And we're back to talk about the egoistic concept of suicide.
And is this part of the
This is Durkheim's final column. Yeah. So the complete opposite of the altruistic one, which was too much integration, is egoistic, which is too little. So this is the person who's isolated or ostracized from society. And well, Durkheim kind of described these loners or people that, you know, felt this isolation and then turned to suicide. This was the one that's actually been expanded upon the most. And so now I'm going to kind of push us forward 100 years to the early 2000s with Dr. Joyner. So Dr. Joyner is actually, he's a psychologist at Florida State. So his father died by suicide. And a couple years later, he wrote this book, Why People Die by Suicide. And as I was kind of like reading about what was happening and talking to mentors, I guess he was started on this project to really figure out like what drives people to do this. And he had read Durkheim and other people that have like conceptualized this, but he started to focus more on this social isolation as a driver of suicide. And he read hundreds, thousands of suicide notes and started to put together a couple themes. And one that was already present is one that's coined by him, which he calls thwarted belongingness. So being kicked out of society was already there, that like social isolation. But he saw this as actually like the starting block of almost like a series of events that progresses. But it always started with that thwarted belongingness.
So like what would an example of that be? Of this, like would it be as something as common as like bullying
Yeah,
in junior high? Okay.
absolutely. So a great way to not belong could be like being transgender as a teenager or a homosexual. It could be being from like a different race or something. Those are all like very easy ways to not belong. But then poverty can be another way to not belong in groups. So like humans are social creatures by nature, and we have certain needs. And unfortunately, we're always looking for ways to form in groups and out groups. And as we do that, people are going to inevitably end up in some of those out groups. There's this always like initial insult of that loss of belongingness. And the way I kind of think about it actually is like you have like your main things you need to survive. Like you have food, water, shelter, oxygen, sleep. And then I would add the fifth is like belongingness.
Yeah.
Really.
Maslow's hierarchy.
Yeah. Like it's something that if you take it away, it like eats at your soul.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think like anecdotally, just thinking about being on call in the emergency department over the last few years, there is that kind of sense of disconnection that is often reality based, but even sometimes not reality based, but just like the felt sense is so strong of like, I don't belong to anyone or with anyone. Why should I stay alive for just my own sake?
Yeah. And that question, like why stay alive
Yeah.
for my own sake, is something they wrestle with for a while. But when it starts to shift is when they start to feel like they're a burden to others.
Yeah.
So that's actually the next step that Joyner identified, which was perceived burdensomeness. the problem's been identified that like I don't belong and I'm not appreciated here. I'm not wanted.
Mhm.
But now, in addition to me not being wanted, my existence is making things worse for other people.
Yeah.
And this is something that like I see a lot in like kind of the pattern of thinking of patients who
Mhm.
they already feel like they're unhelpful. They maybe it's like a divorced dad. It's a
Yeah.
common one. They
Yeah.
don't feel like they belong in their family. And now they're being told in all the ways they're making things worse for everyone else. They're causing conflict or that maybe
Yeah.
they have substance abuse problems and people are telling them that like they're a burden. And they kind of they come to this conclusion that everyone would be better off without me.
Yeah.
And that's actually like a really common theme that Joyner was observing in all these suicide notes is this kind of the phrase of like the world would be better without me.
Mhm.
I'm doing everyone a favor by removing myself from this existence.
Intrinsic in that is such a like a direct how we would think about like nuclear families or just like close, small circle of connection. But it also makes me think about like COVID and how kind of deeply fragile the social bonds became during that time. And I think in some ways are still recovering of not just like who you live with or who you talk to frequently, but just like it's not it's not just belonging to like a couple people that matter. I think that
Mhm.
ultimately matters to people. It's like the belonging across multiple communities and different parts of your life. And I just wonder with like COVID and then work like people working remotely, everything being video and digital and less connected, how that impacts how we think about this factor that you're talking about or cause.
The perceived burdensomeness.
The burden, like the not belonging and then the burdensomeness, yeah, of just like, I, you don't, like, kind of the, not the opposite of it, but the like sense of like, oh, I go to work and like, maybe it's not the biggest thing, but I make this person laugh at the like
Mhm.
water cooler. And then I like talk to this kind of loose friend. And then I come home and maybe see someone that I like, I see my partner, my family, whatever. But it's like those lack of those positive things I could see contributing to the sense of being burdensome because it's like only a
Yeah.
couple people that you're interacting with every day that like if you don't feel like you're good to them.
Right. So like when you're trying to assess your burdensomeness,
Mhm.
I guess I'd say you're trying to you're thinking of ways you're unhelpful and imposing problems on others, which would be your burdensomeness, but then that's being countered by how am I helpful
Yeah.
and how am I benefiting things? And
Yeah.
so as you're kind of like weighing the scale, if you live this life where you feel like you don't do much good
Yeah.
or like help anyone else out, it's easy for those thoughts of I'm not doing much. I actually cause problems for other people by existing. Those thoughts can get louder and they have space to take up the whole room.
Well, I've had a few patients who have said like, I mean, I feel like I want to die all the time, but I won't, people will say family members, but they'll also I've had a few people be like, I don't want my pet to be confused and not know where I am and I need to take care of them. Like
Hmm.
that even that level of kind of burdensomeness versus usefulness is
Yeah.
protective.
No, and we can get into this more in the episode that we do on risk factors, but having a pet can be a very strong protective factor. So you have something that you're responsible to in this world.
Mhm.
And like I could be a burden to everything else in the world, but Magnolia is dependent on me. She's counting on me to get up in the morning and feed her.
Not lilac.
Lilac would find food on
She
her own. She would chew through the
she's
door.
very industrious.
Yeah, she'd figure it out. So but the important thing and one thing that I find
Yeah.
interesting between kind of both the egoistic and altruistic like concepts of suicidality is that they both start to have this turn where it is altruistic. So
Mm.
I'm killing myself for the benefit of society because I'm laying my life on the line for this cause. And also
Uh-huh.
I'm killing myself for the benefit of society because I'm removing me a
Mhm.
burden from society.
Yeah.
But both are hoping to like make the world better without
Yeah.
them.
To give another media example that I think gets at this, did you ever probably not. There's this movie and book called Me Before You, and it's Sam Claflin is in it, and,
Hmm.
he I think I don't remember, he had an injury and basically is paralyzed from the neck down.
Mm.
But the book and the movie are about this girl who becomes his, like, caregiver, and he's, like, very grumpy, and then they fall in love, and the end of the book is about him choosing to live or not, and this whole conversation of being a burden versus not, comes up in a kind of non-mental illness palliative sort of way,
Mhm.
but has that altruistic component that you're talking about.
Mhm. Yeah, I find it really interesting how, as individualistic as humans can be, we weirdly turn things into like doing it for the good of the herd.
Yeah.
I was like, I wonder if there was like something in evolution that's like selected for this like type of depressive or suicidal ideation. Like,
Mm,
were societies where people that determine themselves to be burdens more successful because they like went off into the woods and offed themselves or something?
yeah.
I don't know. That's like kind of dark to think about, but
Yeah.
it's just like it's just fascinating to me. Like, I wonder how this like consistently like came up in the, you know, 50 million years that we
Yeah.
like refined like Homo sapiens as these like hunter gatherers.
Well, I wonder also if it's kind of like how we talk about how, like, modern bodies are not evolved to like current like food technology, sedentary things like that. When we talk in DBT, when we talk about like the function of emotions and what each does for us and what happens if someone doesn't have it,
Hmm.
like shame was the thing that kept us in belonging. And so
Hmm.
in some
The
ways
fear of shame.
yeah, so it was the thing that kept you safe and alive because you would do so much to belong to the in-group that was gonna protect you and protect your children and help you eat and all these things. And so I wonder
Hmm.
if there's something there along the evolutionary side of like this shame can't make sense, or this like sense of belonging in the modern world is maybe so different from the stakes and how belonging looked up until the last couple hundred years.
Yeah. Like, for context, I think the like you could take a modern human from or a human from like 70,000 years ago and they'd probably like integrate into society today and be able to like learn English and function like normally the way biologically we do.
Mhm.
But that person, so the last 70,000 years of evolution, then everything before that was like refining them to be someone who would travel in a tribe of like 20 people,
Mhm.
sometimes less, sometimes a little bit more, and like hunt, climb trees and gather berries all day. So like your concept of belongingness is like how you get along the campfire. And
Mhm.
then over the course of like 10,000 years, like basically a few hundred generations, or like a few thousand generations, we now pivot to like being a part of tribes of hundreds of thousands of people
Yeah.
without activities that we can actively like identify that we're contributing to. We work these nebulous subjective jobs where we contribute to this kind of like industrial behemoth that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Mhm.
You can, I picked a lot of berries, therefore I've contributed to the group and I'm a useful
Mhm.
member. Like, I have these like really concrete, easy ways to identify like how I'm helpful.
Yeah.
And me belonging to the group is like as easy as I'm like sharing food with me. But
Yeah.
now like we're burdened by like all these weird social mores and people are polite to us and they're passive aggressive and we're
Yeah.
members of like 8 different groups and we have these giant complex societies that like I
Yeah.
think we just like socially haven't gotten the means to function in because it's happened
Yeah.
overnight.
Yeah, we're creatures. We're like embodied. And what is it? I mean, we talked about this after. This is gonna sound odd, but like after the APA, and I think I said to you, and I said to one of my friends, like it's actually like it's both very like kind and fulfilling and like incredible to meet people who listen to the podcast. And I don't think my human brain totally understands what's happening when like I mean, like the social media of all of this, of like, what does it mean to belong and to connect kind of parasocially?
Hmm.
Um, I like after the APA, I was like, that was both awesome and I feel confused because I don't get to know people one to one.
It is really strange.
And it's like, to your point, right? Of like, the some of the work we do is like, what is going on?
Yeah, like, and I think like kind of the point of the sidebar is that belongingness is really hard to define now, and because of that, if you're motivated or if you have some kind of pathology that's affecting you, it's easy to manipulate it to feel as though you don't belong. And like it's hard to navigate these like complex subjective systems. So to recap, so we have this sort of blindness, then we have perceived burdensomeness. Now we go on to the final step, which is increased capability.
Hmm.
So that's kind of you've determined that it's altruistic to take your own life, but now you have to kind of practice the act of it. Because when you think about ending your own life or doing something that would put you in harm's way, it's extremely distressing.
Mhm.
And it's like there's every kind of like neurobiological mechanism that you have is telling you to like preserve your life.
Mhm.
It's everything you've been conditioned to, like, like we just talked about evolution for belongingness, but now when you're actually looking at the act, evolution is screaming like, do not do this thing. Like this is it's like
Yeah.
you know how many like
Your
every single one
microbiome
of
is
your
like my guy.
yeah, like every single one of your parents had to get laid to get you to this point in life, and now you're just gonna like unplug, that like dang, your entire gene pool is like fighting you. So it's hard to get used to that.
Mhm.
So a lot of it is actually kind of like going through the motions and like rehearsing.
I mean, again, I think the White Lotus, like, as triggering as it is, and obviously this entire episode needs a trigger warning for this, but, like, I do think the, like, portrayal of the rehearsing on White Lotus this last season with the dad was, like
It's extremely realistic.
yeah.
Um, and like if anyone's like kind of see that and wonder if people are like that, they do. There are like kind of scenarios and stories I've heard where people they'll unload the gun and they'll dechamber it
Yeah.
and they'll just hold it to their head just to see what it feels like. And they'll practice like pulling the trigger, knowing there's no bullets in there, but like just to feel like what the click would sound like. And I think one of the most concerning things actually when I talk to people and I can see them kind of like I'll ask them about their belongingness and their burdensomeness, and they'll walk me down this pipeline. They're like,
Mhm.
"Yeah, I came to the conclusion people are better off without me." And then they're like, and then I kind of started like holding a gun to me, and they were like, weirdly enough, I feel more comfortable with the gun at my temple. Like I know that there's a way out, and there's a part of me that's like, this isn't so bad.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
just a piece of metal against my temple. Like I
Mhm.
was picturing being like this terrible thing, but it's not so bad. And then paradoxically, they get this like sense of ease.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I'm actually not out of options.
Yeah.
And this thing I'm doing is helping other people because now they're almost so bought into this belief that they are a burden and the world would be better off without them.
It in some ways reminds me of the question that we have of, on some studies, the increased suicidality and suicide attempts for particularly adolescents and young adults on SSRIs. And it reminds me of it because one of the theories for why that's been found in studies is that there's like a level of activation from taking some SSRIs that
Hmm.
can bring you into a place where if your depression had been like anhedonic and like slowed, low energy, low motivation, that it can bring you into a place where there's almost this energy, which is also part of what you're saying, right? Like you go from, there's the comfort in some ways of like, this is
Hmm.
actually not as horrifying as my body's telling me it might be, but also the like going from being very depressed and almost vegetative to a flurry of activity before the end.
Yeah. And that kind of like last minute surge is a real thing. The the switch that we're kind of describing is going from like ego dystonic suicidal ideation to ego
Mhm.
syntonic. So this idea of like I'm no longer distressed by these suicidal thoughts, which I kind of want to point out. Like when people at start at the beginning, when they feel isolated,
Mhm.
they feel like they're a burden, the thought will pop into their head that like maybe I should just end it all. Like what if I just, you know, just took my life? At first, that's a very distressing thought to have.
Mhm.
And kind of as they progress through this sequence, the thoughts go from kind of being distressing to being reassuring and
Mhm.
encouraging
Mhm.
and,
Yeah.
and almost easing. So now that kind of someone is like practicing this increased capability, they can, which is actually what Joyner describes as like the final step before a lethal or near lethal attempt.
Yeah.
This part has been refined, this kind of
Mhm.
last part, to say there's like a couple things that go around this. So there's preparatory behavior,
Yeah.
and then
I was
there's
gonna say.
a lot of people's like suicidal risks that kind of get intertwined into this increased capability thing.
Yeah. Which is like what we have on what we do inpatient and outpatient, but especially outpatient, at least our protocol is doing the Columbia suicide screening for
Hmm.
almost every patient. For every patient we see with our intake, and then following that up with the SRA, which is the suicide risk assessment that has a lot of these elements you're saying, and the change in like the quality or like the planning or going from it being non-distressing or being distressing to being acceptable are all kind of
Hmm.
baked in there and why we do them every time.
Yeah, I think the way that and while the way we screen for them touches on all these things, it's definitely imperfect.
Sure.
And, like the problem with this too is that once someone has developed egosyntonic
Yeah.
suicidal ideations and they are presented with a screener that says, like, have you ever thought about killing themselves? They would reasonably understand that if they share that information, people will take action.
Yeah.
And that's something that they actively want to prevent. So, weirdly enough, the people that answer no to those questions on screeners are both the lowest risk and the highest risk.
Yeah.
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 And the other kind of like signs of preparatory behavior where they get this like last second surge within this egodystonic organization are things like giving away their belongings, suicide letters. So kind of like finalizing their thoughts and then setting up pet care or like other like afterlife events. And then at the last kind of bit before the act, even with all of this build up and all this like thought about how it's like the right thing and the good thing to do and practicing capability, there still is usually this like moment of impulsivity that has to like be that final spark.
It's like the kind of moment of terror. I'm almost picturing like an amplified moment of terror of like before you jump off the high dive, that you just kind of stand there thinking about it.
Yeah. So and that I guess is like the final part of like making yourself capable. Like there's like rehearsing it, there's preparing, there's reframing, and then there's like that impulsive moment. For a lot of people or patients, I'll see them try to use substances to get over this like last mark.
Yeah.
So like a really common one will be drinking a lot.
Yeah.
Right before. Interestingly, I was looking at some of the DMV or like I guess Department of Transportation statistics on car crashes. So I don't remember the exact number, so I'm not going to try to quote them. But we had this this event back in medical school where a patient completed suicide right after a car crash, and they weren't like screened, and people were kind of like wondering what happened. And it was an MVC, like so motor vehicle like crash that was versus a tree in the middle of the night on a back road.
Okay. Yeah.
And in the ED, they told everyone that they weren't suicidal. They denied everything, and then basically went home the next day and took their life. So I was kind of like looking more into that. And there's a lot of estimates that if it's like a male or like a mid-50s male or something, and they're inebriated, and it's a high-speed collision on a back road that's like against a tree or like an object or something, it was, and I'm just going to give a range here because I don't want to misquote myself, but I think it was like somewhere between like 10 and 20% of those are estimated to be related to suicide.
Yeah.
And I think that what's interesting is when they come into the emergency department, the initial thought is like, oh, drunk driver crashes. Okay.
Yeah.
And then they're
like, what's
usually
the
unconscious and everything
judgment
else.
also there?
And so they don't get that like same risk assessment. But the like interestingly protective against suicide would be like if it was a car crashing into another car. Because people that are getting drunk to try to go through this act don't usually want to take anyone with them, which is why they're on a back road going fast, trying to like work up the confidence to be drunk and then just slam their car into a tree.
Yeah.
So weirdly enough, I'm on a consult service right now, and I've had a lot of conversations with like care teams who will have this like uncertain like yes or no question about like, hey, this person came in drunk from a car crash and we're not sure if they have safety concerns, but like their family was worried. And like, I'll be very reassuring. I'm like, hey, like, I think it's really reasonable for you to be worried about this. And I kind of like tell them like, if, this was like MVC versus pole middle of the night and like they have alcohol in their system, like it's reasonable for us to like do a safety assessment or kind of like have a conversation with them when they wake up.
It's interesting. So I remember looking into the data on this at one point of suicide. Like people say the term drunkicidal, and that there seems to be with alcohol specifically compared to other substances, like people will report suicidality in the like if they come in the evening, and when they sober up, they kind of say, no, I would never do that. And are there cases with that maybe like it's similar to this where there's kind of like I don't want someone to know, and this is still true, yes, But I also think it speaks to the impulsivity or the decrease in anxiety and inhibition that alcohol allows, that kind of increases this ability to access this somewhat terrifying maybe impulse that is present in someone. Um, I feel like that's alcohol and suicidality, and including driving, is a really complicated, interwoven, I think,
Yeah.
psychiatric presentation.
I think what you're describing, and I say this after I've done 2 years at the VA here. This kind of drunkicidal presentation is of someone who is probably pretty chronically unhappy with their life. They may not be necessarily depressed, but dysthymic,
Yeah.
and they get very drunk, and in their kind of drunken ruminations come to this conclusion that there's no point,
Yeah.
or that they're frustrated and hopeless.
Yeah.
And then as they start to sober up, the hopelessness kind of diminishes or dissolves. And that's I would say distinctly different from the person that's contemplated suicide for a long time and has thought through all these things, has come to these conclusions as to why they want to die. And then they're using alcohol as almost that final flint to ignite.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. There's definitely a distinct difference there. And I wonder,
But we don't see that distinct difference as actually a great point. All we see on the chart is drunk and suicidal.
right. And then it's
That's all the
it's not
constant
like
question is.
it's your long-term outpatient, that you're oh, I know this person and I know what they've been.
Mhm.
It's kind of okay, I'm going to do a consult and we'll decide if they're safe or not, and if they need to go to the hospital, whether they, ideally if they want to, and we think it would be a good idea, but often also the choices are so delineated for a nuanced situation, like suicidal thoughts while intoxicated or in general.
Yeah. And often people will push towards hospitalization
Yeah.
in a lot of those cases, just because it's seen as the less risky thing to do, which I think we all have our own opinions about that.
Yeah, we could do a whole episode on that.
Yeah. So we'll table that for now, but this kind of is also a good segue into my final point, which is these are all describing the ways in which people develop the ideas and capabilities of taking their own life, whether it's for the greater good or whether it's because of they're trying to eliminate distress, or they've come to the conclusion that there's no way to escape from the bounds of their situation. These are all have in common that they're related to our connection to society and also our ability to regulate our own emotions. But everything we've done to understand these things doesn't necessarily help us to predict who will actually die by suicide. And what you brought up, which is I'm going to go see this patient in the ED and decide whether or not they're at a high risk or a low risk and need to come into the hospital, is ultimately what a psychiatrist's job is in a lot of these settings.
Yeah.
So that's actually been the largest criticism of this Joiner's interpersonal theory of suicide, which is kind of the one we just talked about, or even Durkheim's concepts, is that when we're trying to look at a population and people are asking the hard questions, which is which of these members of the population are at the highest risk to die by suicide, is that these theories don't give us a lot of answers.
Right.
And there are a lot of other studies that we do. So when we are trying to answer that question, who, instead of the question why, we have to look at other sets of data, which is something that we'll address in another episode that will be led by Margaret.
Yeah.
So we do look at suicide risk factors.
Suicide risk factor is also kind of the emerging idea of suicide crisis syndrome, which is trying to get at this kind of really high acuity, who is the people that were much more certain, and how do we stratify them by risk, but also I think there's also patients we think about. If someone is chronically suicidal and has had multiple inpatient stays and they've actually felt worse after them, or they've been always followed by, resumption of substance use when they were not having that, or they're traumatizing in some way. I think thinking about risk factors, and then also thinking about this question, like you say, of, well, what do we do with them? Because it's not like we have a solution that's and now that we found the right people, here's our solution that fixes it 100% of the time.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of discomfort with tolerating that we have identified this problem and we may be powerless to solve it.
And
And
an inpatient stay in some cases, not most, but in some can worsen people's the highest time of risk for suicide attempts is the week to 2 weeks post-discharge from a psychiatric hospital.
and data shows that like when people are involuntarily committed, they're much less likely to seek like psychiatric treatment and other things outside of the hospital.
Yeah.
And so yeah, like we basically have this hammer, and we're like, we just have to treat everything like a nail. And some things like we just don't have a tool for, and it takes a lot of humility to say like, yes, this person's at an increased risk compared to the rest of the population for their lifetime, but the only treatment I have to offer them is not something that will improve that risk.
Yeah.
And it's hard to do, and it's scary to do. So
Yeah.
we will get into that more during that episode, but
Yeah.
that was all I had for today.
I just want to say this is a heavy episode. I know some of our episodes we're talking about mental health, and that can be heavy always, but this in particular, I think it's important that we talk about both the theories and then also talk about concrete examples, whether that's in media or common clinical situations, but also to recognize explicitly to the listener, this is a heavy episode. It may feel a little bit different. Go easy on yourself after listening if this is kind of impacting you in any way, just as I think it can be. Even when you're in the field, you can be desensitized to it sometimes, but sometimes the human in us also recalls how heavy this is and just what this topic means to so many people who have been impacted by having suicidal thoughts or actions themselves, or the families of those who have lost people from suicide.
Yeah, it's very possible that if you know someone who's died by suicide, that they've gone down some of the paths that we're describing here. And it's only natural to kind of see your loved one in these stories that we're describing, but also remember that they had their own struggles and things where no individual person can fit any of these theories. Well, on that note, I would like to say thank you so much for listening. We're still kind of going forward with this Margaret episode, Preston episode thing. So if y'all like it, we honestly like it. It's kind of fun.
Too damn bad.
Yeah. So we'll probably do it anyways.
This is our reputation era. Did you hear she got her albums back?
Taylor?
She got her albums back. She
Good for
owns all
her.
of them now.
Oh, yay. So she's making double the revenue.
Okay. Hater.
But we still like your feedback on other things. And actually, we have been going through a lot of your submissions and using that to determine episode content and topics, or at least parts of episodes. So if you're DMing us and we don't respond to you, there's probably a chance we've seen it, but just haven't got a chance to get back to it. And there's some that I've seen and maybe haven't responded to, but I've banked. So I want you to know that eyes are seeing your DMs. We're trying to respond to them, but we can get overwhelmed and busy. If you want to come chat with us, you can always contact us at Human Content Pods, where Shanti will respond. She's much better at being on top of that than we are. Or you can email us directly at howtobepatientpod.com. You can see more from me on YouTube. All this podcast will be on YouTube at It's Presro, or you can just find me on Presro on all my socials. You can find Margaret at Bad Art Every Day on TikTok and Instagram and Substack. She hides really interesting stuff behind the paywall. I mean, I heard it's interesting. I've never been allowed behind the paywall, so
you could pay. You could pay for a woman's work.
Yeah, that's an option.
You set that
but
up
I'm a friend.
You heard it. You heard it here first.
You heard it here first. We're your hosts, Preston Roche and Margaret Duncan. Our executive producers are me, Preston Roche, Margaret Duncan, Will Flannery, Kristen Flannery, Aaron Corney, Rob Goldman, and Shanti Brooke. Our editor and engineer is Jason Portizo. Our music is by Omer Benzvi. To learn more about our program disclaimer and ethics policy, submission verifications and licensing terms, and our HIPAA release terms, go to howtobepatientpod.com or reach out to us at howtobepatient@human-content.com with any questions or concerns. How to Be Patient is a Human Content production.
How to be patient.
Thank you for watching. If you want to see more of us, or if you want to see, this is Lilac, she's my cat. She's going to be waving her hand at one of the floating boxes, which will lead to more episodes. Lilac, point to the other episodes. Lilac doesn't know what the internet is, but I swear they're there. They probably exist for real. But in the meantime, I'm just going to pet Lilac, and then I'm going to go dance in the background.